Good morning, my love muffins. Reverend Sue from All Paths to God, recording live from my living room. Well, that good morning is probably more like good afternoon, as I have new internet service and some new equipment, and I'm ironing out some snafus. So by the time this actually gets uploaded to Facebook and is viewable, it'll probably be more like good afternoon, but good whatever. Many of you know that I was sick this week. I had a very sore throat, and when I went to the doctor, he said I had a very severe infection, and was surprised when he tested it for strep, and that came back negative. So he immediately scheduled me for a COVID test. And while I had faith that it was all good, that it was all fine, I also was a little scared. I wasn't so much scared for myself, but I was scared for my peeps, for my family, and for my friends and my community. Reverend Denise had been spending time here. Maya and Ruby spent some time here and overlapped with my sister Remya, who had come and stayed for a week when we came back for our family get-together. I had a board meeting here, and even though we all wore masks and I tore my living room apart so that everybody could sit 6 feet apart, they were still in the house. And of course, my parents. So I quarantined myself immediately. And by the way, thank you very much, Sunny and Alice, for your tender, loving care to my parents. They feel very comforted by the fact that there's other people here that love them and will take care of them in the event that I can't. So thank you very much for your time. So I quarantined myself while I was taking antibiotics and waiting for the test results, though I was a little afraid that might be a little too late kind of thing. The antibiotics worked. I feel better. The test came back negative. That's grand news. And thank you very much for the prayers of support out there, because my faith was constantly quarreling with my fear. As a matter of fact, I reflected that in my noon message that I send out to people. Many of you know I do a high noon, and at 12 o'clock I send out an inspirational message to join my community in a higher consciousness. And my message yesterday said, sometimes the hold my heart has on faith feels like the hold my hands have on water. Nonetheless, my mind holds faith as solid as a rock. As Scripture says, and on this rock I shall build my church. Principle and practice. I had faith in principle from the very beginning. My faith in practice, though, has been, is, will continue to be a work in progress. Fortunately, I've been inspired from the very beginning to keep practicing and keep practicing. From my very first class I took in Science of Mind, the foundations class that they have, which goes over basically the history of religious science and the principles and the practice, which include what we talked about in the last couple of sermons, affirmative prayer and making affirmations and meditation. Ernest Holmes used the Science of Mind teaching symbol. It's called the Science of Mind logo, to help explain the principle of truth, of God, of the source of our being and our relationship to it. The Science of Mind symbol tells the story of creation. It represents the Holy Trinity, or the triune nature of God: spirit, soul, and body, which we refer to as love, law, and life. Kind of like 3 aspects of time. There's the past, the present, and the future. The past is not the same as the present, and the present is not the same as the future. But these are still all one thing, time. And the Holy Trinity, spirit, soul, body, are different in that they're not the same as each other, but they're still one thing. They're still God. The circle in this symbol represents the allness and the oneness of God, that no beginning and no end, that God is everything, and everything and something else cannot coexist. The top of the V represents the presence back of all creation, the eternal love, the spirit, the invisible essence, the mystical elements of God, the mind, intelligence, the consciousness, thoughts, ideas, the place from which all things come, the place in which all things live and breathe and have their being. The middle of the V, which has two parallel lines that cross across the middle of it, represents the power back of all creation, the universal law, the mechanical elements, the activity of God. It's the subconscious mind, or the place where all thoughts and all ideas from all people and all time through all evolution are stored, and the place where the vibrations of those thoughts that dominate our beliefs activate our feelings. The presence and the power, the love and the law of God. And the bottom of the V represents life back of all creation, the infinite possibility of expression, the body, the form, matter, our experience, conditions. This is a story of creation and the creative process. There's a presence for good in the universe, and we can tap into it. There's a power for good in the universe, and we can use it. But the love and the grace and the good of God is not ours until our thinking says so. And it's definitely not ours if our thinking says no. And if our thinking says fear instead of faith, then our thinking says no. And the classes help inspire and give you ideas of how to practice. In our first class, we ended with a project. Most of the classes end with a project. And I was a little worried about that because at the time I was clinical director of a counseling agency in Pinellas and Pasco counties, and I had 60 counselors working for me. I was working 14, 16 hours a day. I was traveling and doing lectures. I couldn't imagine when I would have the time, let alone have access to arts and crafts to do a project, so I was a little fearful. But it was my first intentional application of principle and practice, and converted my fear to faith and said, well, you know, I'm just going to be open to letting it unfold. There'll be a way that this can be done. And the first thing that happened, which is why I shared the image of the Science of Mind logo, first thing that happened is I had this image of that logo with the word JAMS in the V, JAMS. And of course it immediately went through my head, okay, so there was a flow of God descending down into form, and there's a block, there's a jam. That makes perfect sense. And so I would capture that and I put it on the symbol and waited for the next chapter to unfold. And the next vision that I got was JJJJAAAMMS written along the shape of the V. And I said, okay, so there's a lot of blocks, there's a lot of jams with the flow of God into creation. And I just kept seeing that over and over and over and over again. And then one night, in the middle of the night, I was sound asleep. I sat right up in bed and went, no, that can't be. And I went and got my class list. And the other students that were in the class were Jay, Joyce, Judith, and Jill, Alan, Yvonne, Astrid, Mickey, and Margie, and Sue. J, 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 A, 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 M, M, S. Well, I had goosebumps. And then I started having this poem unfold through me, and I would just capture it. It was called Where's God? In the planets, the moon, the stars shining bright. In Alan's dreams on Tuesday night. In the heat of the summer, in winter's bitter cold. In Astrid's loving heart and her concern for the old. In the vastness of the universe, in the depths of the sea. And a man like Jay, who's as kind as can be. In the purr of a kitten, in a lion's mighty roar. In Mickey's tenderness, right down to her core. In a flower that blooms from one small seed. In Judith's devotion to help those in need. In the green of the forest, in the blue of the sky. In Jill's little grandson, who puts a glint in her eye. In creatures that crawl, in those that take wing. In the way your spirit soars, just to hear Joyce sing. In a neighbor, a friend, a sister, a brother. In the way Margie glows when she speaks of her mother. In hobbies and talent, in passions of the heart. In music, in dance, in Yvonne's love of art. In ignorance, in wisdom, in dark, in the light. In Reverend Nikki's guidance to help us think right. I know that it's true. It's easy to see. If God is in each of you, God must be in me. So where is it, you ask, that God can be found? Absolutely everywhere. Just look around. So this just unfolded effortlessly through me, piece by piece. And so I thought I was finished. And then I kept saying the word, jams, jams, jams. And then I saw it on the parallel lines that go across the middle, J-A-M-S. I was like, of course, the love of God is blocked, and the law of God, J-A-M-S. And once I captured that, it immediately came to me, just ask me, Sue, J-A-M-S, just ask me, Sue. Of course, the presence and the power. Focusing my mind on what I wanted to see was part of unblocking the flow. So I went into class one night and they were talking about, does anybody have any ideas of what project they were going to do? And I was kind of excited because here I'm already finished. And as we were sitting there talking, I all of a sudden looked over at Yvonne and I said, Yvonne, how do you spell your name? And I said, is it A-V-O-N-N-E? And she said, no, you spell my name Y-V-O-N-N-E. And I didn't say anything, but I went home. I went, really? I thought I was all finished. But now this doesn't fit. That J kept having the word jams, jams, jams. And I went, well, of course, the triune nature of God. I only have 2 levels complete. So part of that has to play out in the 3rd level, in the body of God. So when I saw jams down in that level, I immediately just turned it over and said, okay, so what's the next message? And I realized that not only was Yvonne with a Y not in the equation, but Reverend Nikki was not in the equation. And as soon as that went through my head, I saw the letters Y and N. And what goes through your mind when you see that? Did you immediately say yes and no? Yes and no. The 3rd level, in order for something to take form, as we said, We have to say yes to faith, and we have to say no to fear, because fear is a no to the dissension of grace and good into our lives. So when I was all finished this project, I made up little Christmas ornaments. It was right before Christmas, and put the lettering on it for each of my classmates and gave it to them. But this was such a powerful experience for me, because it was my first exposure to having a principle in the universe, having a power in the universe that we're one with and we have access to. And if we're deliberate in our consciousness, it will play out in the direction of that. And faith over fear is an ongoing theme. Two forces competing against each other. One is the way of God, and the other one is in the way of God. Causes a jam, causes a block. God never stops the flow of grace and good into our lives. Something gets in the way. Us, our fear. Fear says no to the flow or to the increase of grace or good. And we have to say yes. And faith says yes. You know, Ann Landers, who was an advice columnist and the twin sister of Dear Abby, for those of you that didn't know that, received 10,000 letters a month of people describing their problems and asking for help. And she was asked if there was one predominant theme in the problems that people wrote about. She said, well, one problem above all the others seems to be fear. People are afraid of losing their health, losing their wealth, losing their loved ones. In quotes, she said, people are afraid of life. And our life experiences can be quite traumatic and quite brutal. And they have taught us to be afraid. There's another story I always like of Steve May, who wrote it in his book called The Story File. And he told a story about a New Yorker who was driving through Texas, and he ran into a truck that was transporting a horse. A few months later, he tried to collect damages for his injuries. And the insurance company's lawyer said, how can you now claim to have injuries when the police report says you said you weren't hurt? And he said, it's like this. I was lying on the road in a lot of pain, and I heard someone say the horse had a broken leg. The next thing I knew, the sheriff pulled out his gun and shot the horse. Then he turned to me and he said, are you hurt? Life teaches us to be afraid. Faith or fear. We may have faith in God. Faith that we're guarded, that we're guided, that we're protected. And then someone shoots the horse. Then a virus ravages our world. Then our economy seems to be teetering on the edge. Then our democracy is cursed for its politics and its politicians rather than celebrated for its freedoms. Then someone shoots the horse. And the hold our heart has on faith feels like the hold our hands have on water. Thus, my faith jam, the block to the flow, with being sick this week. Isn't it true that we have greater fear that germs can invade us, that disease can take hold of us, that we need medicines to help us, than faith that God can protect and heal us? Though I'm not suggesting that we don't take medicine or seek doctor's help, or I once said to my minister, what's the difference between religious science and Christian science? And she said, well, Christian scientists believe in prayer. We, religious science, believe in a pill and a prayer. So we believe in the integration of the whole human being with a spiritual being and aligning all those processes with principle for our highest good. But isn't it true that fear is often more dominant in us than our faith? And I want faith to be putty in my hands rather than water running through my fingers, don't you? We are constantly traveling a road between what experience has taught us to believe is the truth and the truth. That creates lots of jams on the road to faith. But the choice of faith or fear is ours, as is the rechoice and the rechoice. Sounds like rejoice, doesn't it? Rechoice, rejoice, rejoice. That fits. Rechoice makes faith putty in our hands. You know, in the biblical story of David and Goliath, the entire army of Israel thought Goliath was too big to defeat. David thought Goliath was too big to miss. Fear or faith? Likewise, we've grown fearful that the world of affairs is too big to defeat. But the truth of who we are is too big to miss. Faith is about rechoice. Rechoice, 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 and rejoice. If we want faith to be putty in our hands, we have to just keep remolding faith, refitting it around our circumstances, around those jams that we feel trying to turn us toward fear. So your mission, my friends, if you so choose to accept it, is rechoice and rejoice. When you're faced with a jam, when you're faced with fear, picture that science of mind symbol. Picture that dissension of spirit trying to make its way of grace and goodness into form. And picture that, JAMS, picture the block there. And think to yourself, rechoice and rejoice, rechoice and rejoice. Every time we focus back to faith, we remove some of that jam. Just ask me, says God. And ask me and ask me and ask me and ask me. So my love muffins, rechoice and rejoice. That's faith putty in our hands. Whatever we've done or not done, succeeded at or failed at, whatever time we've used well or wasted, we're here now. And as the saying goes, we haven't come this far to only come this far. All that matters is where we go from here. Rechoice, rechoice and rejoice, rechoice and rejoice. Faith putty in our hands. We can't go back and make a new start, but we can start now and make a new ending. We are the people. Now is the time, and this is the way. Namaste, my love muffins.